this week, Jacob is going to meet his brother. Last week, he was finding out that he had 400 men with him, and he couldn't go back to Laban's house, and he had to go forward. God had told him to go forward. He had angels with him, but he was still scared to cross the Jordan. And I've tried to explain to you that that's what we all go through in our Christian walk, is that sometimes we can't go back and we have trouble going forward, and God wants us to move. And we have to trust Him and have faith in what He's doing, and we will be overcomers of our flesh if we do that. So he has overcome the flesh, and now he's got a new name that he wrestled with God and prevailed, which is Israel. But now he's going to go meet him, and now he sent all these animals forward before him, and he has crossed over now, and he is going in front of them. So last week we saw Jacob wrestle with God and decide to completely submit to God's will and follow his lead. He has sent all his worldly goods towards Esau and is now following them. That's what we're supposed to do, is give up our worldly goods and follow God. Verse 1, Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 maidservants. And he put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. Then he crossed over before them, and bowed himself to the ground 7 times, until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. So God had already prepared Esau's heart. That's why he was safe to go. But he knew that the last thing he heard was that Esau was going to kill him. Now notice what he did. He put his servants and his servant wives and their children first. And then he put Leah and her children next, and then Rachel and her child last. So he was putting them in order of, I'll let y'all go, and then these others can run if he attacks. So he is still thinking in a Jacob mind. He's not trusting God completely yet. But I don't have a problem with that as long as he's still doing what God is saying. We talked about this last week, that Jacob had arrayed his family in the order of his love. The ones he loved most were in the back, and his servants and their children were first. Jacob made an animated entrance to show his respect to his brother, hoping he was forgiven. Then Esau ran to meet him, and they embraced to show true kinship. Do we not put certain things in front and keep the best for last? Everybody we're supposed to have total surrender. But we always, well, God, you can have this, and you can have that, but I'm keeping this. You know, that's the way it always is. And we'll play the Christian game for a long time, and then pretty soon God's going to say, I want that. And that's what happens to us. And the prophecy was that Esau was going to be a servant to Jacob. But now he is bowing down and calling himself a servant to Esau. So apparently the prophecy is not ready yet. And I think we're going to find out why in a little bit. Verse 5, And he lifted his eyes, and he saw the women and children, and said, Who are these with you? So he said, The children whom God has graciously given your servant. Then the maidservants came near, and their children bowed down. And Leah also came near with her children, and they bowed down. Afterwards Joseph and Rachel came near, and they bowed down. Then Esau said, What do you mean by all this company which I met? And he said, These are to find favor in the sight of my Lord. So now he's calling him Lord. Here the family also showed their deference to Esau. Then Esau asked Jacob what all the gifts were for, and Jacob told him it was to find favor with Esau. Now we know that if he accepts the gift, it's sort of like a covenant. He could have gone and killed everybody and took the animals and the wives that he wanted and killed the men, if that was what he was going to do. But if he makes a gesture towards him and he takes these animals, then he said, well, you can't kill me now. We've already made an agreement. It's like an unspoken agreement that everything's cool now, isn't it? You know. 33 verse 9, but Esau said, I have enough, my brother, keep what you have for yourself. Now that doesn't sound very good. He's like, I've got enough, you can keep what you've got. In other words, I don't need it. And you'll find this a lot in the Middle Eastern cultures. They will at first deny any gifts and then they'll take it. So it's kind of like a bargain back and forth that they're making. And Jacob said, no, please, if I have now found favor in your sight. So he's saying, if I found favor in your sight, take the animals. Then receive my present from my hand, inasmuch as I have seen your face, as though I had seen the face of God. Boy, he's really deference to him. And you were pleased with me. Please take my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. So he urged him, and he took it. Now, when he said that God has been gracious with him and he has enough, that could have been a mistake. Because he could have said, you stole my blessing, is why you got enough. You know? So he could have kept quiet on that part, but he said it anyway. We spoke of the last week that Jacob was strategically using this gift as a covenant between Esau and him. If Esau accepted the gift, the deal was done. Remember the prophecy that Jacob would rule over Esau. But for now, Esau was allowed to call the shots. Notice in verse 11, Jacob blesses Esau because God has dealt graciously with him. In a way, Jacob is getting up off his knees here and showing Esau that God has shown him favor. If Esau had bad times for the last 20 years or so, this could have been seen as Jacob boasting. Now see, Esau apparently had a good life. What if he was scraping and starving and barely making it, and he says, God has blessed me and look at all that I have? That he would have said, sick of 400 men. That's my opinion. I don't know. Verse 12. Then Esau said, let us take our journey. Let us go, and I will go before you. Now Esau is saying, you're coming home with me. Okay? But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are weak, and the flocks and the herds which are nursing are with me. And if the men should drive them hard one day, all the flocks will die. Please let my Lord go on ahead before his servant. I will lead on slowly at a pace which the livestock that go before me and the children are able to endure, until I come to my Lord in Seir. That's a flat-out lie. He's lying to his face. He doesn't have any intention of going home with him. And Esau said, now let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. Some of these 400 men soldiers. And he said, they can go along with you. But he said, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. Now Seir and Edom are the same thing. Seir is a town and Edom is a country. So Esau's name was changed to Edom because it means red. And so now we have the Edom and the Edomites and Edom land. And Seir is a town in there. So that's where he's going. And he is basically the boss of Edom. So he wants his brother to come with him. And Jacob's saying, I just got rid of Laban. I want to be on my own, and now I've got to go work for my brother. He said, no, I ain't going. So this was, I'm telling you, this was an outright lie when he said he was going to go with him. Here's another tricky statement by Esau to get Jacob to agree to go to his new home, Seir in Edom. If Jacob went to Esau's land, would he not be subject to Esau and not going for his own freedom? Jacob would have been seen as working for Esau instead of Laban. Notice Jacob talking his way out of following Esau due to his young animals being driven hard. So Esau offers to leave some of his soldiers with Jacob. Esau relented and let Jacob go at his own speed. But I'm sure Esau figured Jacob was headed for Edom. He was convinced that he's coming home with him. Okay? 17. And Jacob journeyed to Sukkot, built himself a house, and made booths for his livestock. Therefore the name of the place is called Sukkot. Then Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram, and he pitched his tent before the city. And he bought a partial land where he had pitched his tent from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. Okay? Now, if we were looking on a map, Edom is south, and he went north. He didn't even go a little bit down and stay. He just went the other way completely. So now he is with the Canaanites. This is, or actually Hivites is where it is, but this is the land of Canaan. He's not going into Edom, which was south of there. Okay. Now, 100 pieces of money, they think that the money was probably worth, each piece of money was probably worth a sheep. So his price of 100 sheep is what he paid for this land. He set on and put up his tents. Now, he didn't go into the town there. He stayed outside because he had herds and stuff. But this is a pagan town, and here's the Hebrew nation outside of town. Okay. Edom was south of where they were, and Jacob headed north to Shechem. Jacob camped outside the city because he had flocks and herds. He bought the land from the local king to make sure he couldn't be removed. This was a tactic they always used because nobody ever wanted the Hebrews. Everywhere they went, they were visiting. They were aliens in a strange land. So they would want to say, well, you can't run me off, so they would buy the land. Okay? A piece of money was thought to be a price of a sheep. Sukkot means booths. So they were there pretty temporary, but ended up there for about 20 years. So these Sukkots are just shacks. They're just basically lean-tos, you know, you might call it a tar paper shack or whatever. But it's a bunch of branches and stuff, and it's to keep you out of the sun and the weather. Now they built that for their animals, but see, later on when they come out of Egypt, they're going to live in these same Sukkots. And that's why we have the Feast of Tabernacles, because they build little Sukkots out in the wilderness, and that's where they lived when they were on their way to the Promised Land. And that basically you're living where a cow lives. So it's very primitive, nothing elaborate about it. Remember, God told Jacob to go home to Beersheba. That's where he's supposed to be going, is Beersheba. But he stopped way short from there. El Elohe Israel means God, the God of Israel. So he's already been named Israel, and now this is God, the God of Israel. Hamor means ass, but at this time and place it was not a derogatory name. Next, we will go on to chapter 34 to see what happened with Hamor, Shechem, and Dinah. We need to remember that a marriage contract always had a condition that the bride was a virgin. If she wasn't a virgin, her chances for marriage was almost impossible. So I wanted to kind of preview that before we get into the next chapter.
That's Hamor means ass.
But see, you might look at it as a burst of beating a burden, or something along that line. And it wasn't a derogatory term, it was just a name they gave him. Okay, 34, chapter 34, verse 1. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her. His soul was strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman and spoke kindly to the young woman. So Shechem spoke to the father, Hamor, saying, "Get me this young woman as a wife." Now, what we have to know is that when it says, now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, out of all of these boys that were mentioned, there's only one girl. There could have been 12 girls. We don't know. But they gave you her name so that later there was going to be a story about her. We need to know where she came from and who she was. So Dinah was a daughter of Leah, and of course Simeon and Levi were two of her blood brothers. Now the other 9 brothers that were going along, they weren't from the same mother. So they would consider her a sister, but not the way Simeon and Levi did. Okay? Now, in the first verse, we see that Dinah wanted to see the daughters of the land. And what she was doing was like, I'm a Hebrew girl that's been kept away from everybody and everything, and the only people that I've ever seen were in my little group, and we're following sheep all over the country, and I want to see what other people are like. Well, these other people are idol worshipers, and they dress differently, seductively, all of these things that she was not. So she wanted to see what was in the land. A lot of people are naive when they go out into the world and they start getting sucked into things that they shouldn't be. And of course, what happened to Abraham? When God told him to go to a place, there was a famine there, and he went into Egypt, and they took his wife as part of the harem. So anytime you see this, what happens? Trouble comes. So he didn't go where he was supposed to go, and now one of his daughters is raped. There's no other way you can describe what happened to her other than rape. He violated her. You know, some people say, well, he loved her and all this kind of stuff. No. He was a prince, used to getting what he wanted, and he took her. And he kidnapped her, because we're going to find later on that he kept her at the house. Okay? So he was probably violating her every day that they were out bargaining for a bride price for her. For Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that was a no-no. The Hebrews were not to mix with unbelievers or idol worshippers. A quick look back would show the trouble idol worshippers had in the chosen people's camp. These pagan girls acted differently and dressed differently and had different beliefs. If you'll remember, Isaac and Rebekah didn't like Esau's choice of women. They were two Canaanite women. Then later he married a daughter of Ishmael. I think he might have thought that may make things better because it was one of Abraham's son's daughters. But no, they don't want idol worshippers mixing blood. Remember, we have to keep in mind that this is a seed war. And they are supposed to stay separate. A lot of people think, well, the Bible is bigoted because they would never intermarry. They wouldn't go into these other places. But it was to keep the seed pure. They were set aside, holy people, set aside for God.
The Jews still do that today.
Right. They're following what God said to do. But people say, well, that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. But what you're doing is taking God's people back into the world. None of that would be welcomed in Jacob's camp. In verse 2, the verse describes rape. There's no gentle way to describe this or pass it off as a youthful indiscretion. Dinah is thought to be about 15 or 16 at the time. She probably knew very little about the world and its ways. Shechem, on the other hand, was raised in wealth, advantage, and was used to getting whatever he wanted. Verse 4 speaks of a spoiled brat asking Daddy to help him get this girl for a wife. So he is saying, Daddy, go get this girl for me. Whatever you got to pay, whatever, I want it. This is like somebody saying, I want that new Mustang, you know, for my high school graduation car, you know. 34:5. And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. Now his sons were with his livestock in the field, so Jacob held his peace until they came. And I want everybody to understand, I want you to look at Jacob's reaction to what happened versus the two sons. Jacob is going back to Jacob. Jacob is wondering how he can manipulate this around because he is not doing... If your daughter was attacked, I don't think that you would hold your peace. And I don't think that you would like it when Hamor came to buy her. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. And the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved and very angry because he had done this a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing which ought not be done. And I underline in Israel because it's the first time you see the name Israel in the Bible. But see, now that we have Jacob as Israel, this is going to be the land of Israel. And this is why they said in Israel. Jacob heard his daughter was violated, but he held his peace until the sons came in from the fields. Hamor went out to Jacob to bargain with him for Dinah. The brothers of Dinah were not happy with them wanting to make a bargain after what Shechem had done. In verse 1, we are reminded that Dinah was the daughter of Leah. Simeon and Levi were brothers of Dinah by blood. This will make a huge difference later on. Verse 8. But Hamor spoke with him, saying, The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife, and make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters to yourselves, so that you shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade in it, and acquire possessions for yourselves in it. Then Shechem said to the father and to her brothers, Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. Ask me so much dowry and a gift, and I will give according to what you say to me. But give me the young woman as a wife. So man, this is like an open-ended thing. Just whatever the king can afford, he's willing to pay. Shechem believes he is going to make things all right by offering a dowry and joining his people with Jacob's tribe. He is suggesting that they would intermarry. They could buy and sell together. I should have underlined buy and sell, because that ought to trigger something in everybody that's read Revelation. And not be separated anymore. So that he was going to become part of the world instead of the other way around. He's going to buy and sell with them. For me, this sounds a lot like a suggestion from the world and not what God wanted for his people. Can we sell out our principles just to get along with the world? We must try to remember what God's plan was for his people, to see that they were separated out to be a holy people and not of the world. This world sees this as bigoted. In the near future, we as Christians will be named bigots if we separate from the world. So, if we don't go along to get along, we're going to be shunned and bigoted and attacked and persecuted. That's coming already, and it's going to get so bad you're not going to believe it. Yeah. I don't believe that people are even going to have a job, because it's going to be in there about the LGBT. Human resources is going to have all kinds of stuff that you said something that was hateful. Everything is going to be hateful. That's the way it is right now in Canada. There's certain verses that you can't read in the Bible because it's hate speech. We are voting for the people that are going to kill us. We are voting for the people that are going to kill us. You're going to find Christians that'll say, well, there's nothing wrong with Muslims. You're going to find people saying, what's wrong with sodomites? You're a hateful person. You're a bigoted person. But see, Jesus said in red writing, as it was in the days of Noah and as it was in the days of Lot. And he is telling you that we are putting people in power over us that's going to cause him to come back. Now, if you are already dead to your flesh, then it shouldn't matter to you. We are to live the life, the kingdom life, and shun the flesh life. So a lot of people say, oh, that sounds like good words and everything. But you wait till you can't buy and sell. The Bible is about the church. It's not about lost people. The church is reading the Bible. They're the ones making the choice to have gay marriage in their church. They're the ones that, 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves. See, we're not humble. We think we got it made. Well, see, the lost people are lost. The Bible is for saved people. And that's why I come up with this, that there are foolish virgins. Because he's talking about church people. And if you go look at the 7 letters in Revelation, he's talking about churches. Telling you that you think you've got all this wired, but I have this against you. There's only one church, and that's the church of brotherly love. He has promised that you will not see the trial coming upon the whole earth. That's the church of Philadelphia. All of the other ones, he does not promise that. Now, I think the church of Smyrna, which is death, means if you go to your death for me, you won't see the trials of the earth either, because you'll be in heaven. But there's the rest of them, in fact, it is said that we are in the age of Laodicea, which we think that we're rich and prideful and all this kind of stuff, but we are poor, naked, blind, and whatever else he says. I don't have it memorized. But the church at Laodicea is where we are today. We think we got it made.
That was lukewarm, wasn't it?
That was the lukewarm church. And that's why I try to emphasize, I don't want to say I'm preaching, but I try to emphasize to people that examine yourself and see if you are sold out to Christ. Because you can't hold anything back.
You don't want to become violent.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't want to be vomited out of his mouth. I don't want to be halfway Christian. I want to be his bride. And I try to get that across in my lessons. But almost everybody says, well, I do enough and I'm good enough and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. You ought to wake up every morning, fall to your knees, repent of what you've done, say, lead me and guide me today. Because we think that, well, I could do it on my own. I'm doing fine. Nothing wrong with me. But we need to throw ourselves at his mercy and grace, and he will lift us up. And our weakness is his strength. Well, it's like last week I talked about, don't be ashamed when he comes. We were talking about how Jacob was wrestling with God. Should I go? Should I do what God said? Should I do this? Should I do that? He finally said, I'm going to trust God, and he went. We don't want to be, if Jesus comes back today, we want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant.
Right.
We don't want to hear, I'm ashamed of you. These are all things that we need to think about before he comes back. You need to be ready, because there's a lot of people that think that I'm going to be gone, or I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But I'm telling you, when they come up with that sword on your neck, or that revolver up against your head, you're going to say, I'll take the mark. Or your child's head, because that's the way they operate. And our own brothers and sisters are going to call us haters and bigots. So it's going to be tough. You're going to be standing pretty much alone. All you've got is God. That's all you've got. And well done, good and faithful servant. Who are you a man pleaser or a God pleaser? You know, because there's no in between. And I like to try to get that across to people, is they're thinking they got 1 foot in the world and 1 foot in the kingdom, and they're going to make it. And I'm like, no, the foot in the kingdom will be tossed out. You'll be tossed out where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. So anyway, verse 13, I think is where I left off. But the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father and spoke deceitfully, because he had defiled Dinah their sister. So now the 2 sons are speaking up, and daddy's kind of keeping quiet. And they said to them, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a reproach to us. Now listen to what he's saying. He's saying, we'll make a deal with you if you'll get circumcised. We'll do what you want. But circumcision is an outward sign. But to be a Jew, the outward sign is the circumcision, but it's also to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So these are pagan worshipers. It doesn't matter if they get circumcised or not. And he's also saying it would be a reproach. So he's saying that you have to join in with our covenant. See, this was Abraham's covenant to get circumcised. So you have to take this covenant, and they're going to do it, okay? But on this condition, we will consent to you if you will become as we are, if every male of you is circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. But if you will not heed us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and be gone. And the words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. Here we see the sons are taking over from Jacob to handle the situation. Circumcision is a covenant between the Hebrew nation and God. I'm sure there is much more than circumcision to do to become God's people. But they were insisting that the pagans live as they do and not as pagans. They didn't discuss giving up their idols and worshiping the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This deal was acceptable to Hamor and Shechem, so they agreed. Verse 19. So the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. He was more honorable than all the household of his father. So he's excited to get this done. Let's do it, you know. And he went to the gate to make a deal with all the people. And Hamor and Shechem, his son, came to the gate of the city and spoke with the men of their city, saying, these men are at peace with us. Therefore let them dwell in the land and trade in it. For indeed the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men consent to dwell with us, to be one people, if every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Now this is a key verse, keep this one in mind. Verse 23. Will not their livestock and their property and every animal of theirs be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they will dwell with us. And all who went out of the gate of the city heeded Hamor and Shechem, his son. Every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of the city. Now see, Hamor is the king. If they come in with him, he's going to have all of their stuff. I mean, can a king do pretty much what he wants to do in his own land, with his own people? Yeah. So he's got it all figured out. He says, we're going to do this, and they're going to come in peacefully. He says, don't they live in peace with us? There was no warriors and all that. Hamor's got an army. So he figures, we'll get new girls. They're probably tired of looking at the same ones they had in the town. And he says, we'll trade with them, we'll make money, they got riches, and if we need be, I'll just kill them and take it. They were willing to do it, but it says they spoke deceitfully. They knew that they were not going to give up their idols, and they didn't want them in there. And why? Because of the seed war. We are to be holy, separated people from the world. Okay? Because Shechem wanted Dinah, he and his father went to the gate to discuss the offer with the men of the city. Notice how Jacob was described as peaceful, and they would have more women to choose from, and their daughters could marry into wealth that they didn't already have. So their daughters could marry some of the men of Jacob, and they had flocks and lots of money and stuff. So they could mix their money. Then the truth comes out in verse 23. They saw them as weak and could easily be conquered, and all that they had would be theirs. Hamor was a king and figured he could just take what he wanted eventually. All males agreed to be circumcised. 25. Now it came to pass on the third day, when they were in pain, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came boldly upon the city and killed all the males. And they killed Hamor and Shechem, his son, with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went out. Notice that she was still at the house. So she had been kidnapped for a few days by then. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because their sister had been defiled. They took their sheep, their oxen, and their donkeys, what was in the city and what was in the field, and all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives they took captive, and they plundered even all that was in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, now listen to what his reaction was to this. You have troubled me by making me obnoxious, or stinky, I think is the King James Version, among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me. I shall be destroyed, my household and I. But they said, should we treat our sister like a harlot? So look at the two different ways of thinking. He's figuring that I'm going to get killed out of this deal. And they're saying, well, what do you want us to do? She's our sister. You want us to treat her like a whore.
Dinah was
Leah's daughter.
So if it had been Rebecca's, it might have been a different story. No?
Yeah, but we don't know if Rebecca had any more than two kids.
Yeah, so this was Leah, and he was, yeah, that's like selling her, you know?
Or Rachel, I think it is. But anyway, you might think that Jacob had a good reaction, a thoughtful reaction, and that Levi and Simeon were wrong. We're going to find out something different here in a minute. After 3 days, now here's another thing to remember, that it wasn't just Simeon and Levi. They have servants. They have men. So it wasn't just two men killing a whole city. Besides that, they could sneak around from house to house. Believe me, it can be done. A lot of people said 2 men couldn't kill the whole city. After 3 days, the pain was the greatest, and many were probably suffering from infection. Like he said, it's a little different for a man to get circumcised than it is a baby. Simeon and Levi were the ones that killed all the males. They were closest to Dinah, being sons of Leah. Notice Dinah was still in the house of Hamor, and the brothers took her out. Was Shechem still sleeping with her outside of marriage? This is a big, 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 big sin. I mean, this was like, if he had raped her and let her go home, he could have always denied it and said, well, she wanted me or something. But this was not a youthful, he kidnapped her and took her home with him and did what he wanted to do. And I don't know why Jacob, he's the daddy,
Yeah.
you know. I didn't think this was a good reaction. Then they plundered the city, taking the women and children of the Hivites. They also took their livestock. In Genesis 49, when Jacob hands out his blessings to his children, Simeon and Levi will pay for this atrocity. So, Jacob is not, he doesn't like this his whole life. But we're going to find out that God is on Simeon and Levi's side a little later. So, Genesis 49:5, we're going to skip up to where they get the blessing. Simeon and Levi are brothers, instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. So what he is saying is that they actually just, what would be the right word? They cut an ox where he couldn't walk. They didn't kill him. That was meanness, you know. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So you're going to find the Levites don't get a land. And they are made the priests. And what is their job the rest of their life? To slaughter animals. Okay? And I don't know if I don't think Simeon got a tribe either. I'm not sure. When we get there, this is going to be interesting. I've got to do a whole lot more work on it. But Joseph's children, Manasseh and Ephraim, are going to get lands. But Simeon and Levi don't. So this is his own blood children. And these others are adopted by Jacob. So Jacob adopted Joseph's children, so his grandchildren got land. They were even so mean they just crippled an ox for meanness. They figured they were owed for what happened to Dinah, and she wouldn't be the bride. She wouldn't get a bride price no matter what. Let's notice what Jacob thought of it. Now, if you did this to a girl in those days, you owed her money because she was ruined and she would never get a bride price. So they took everything in the town. So they're going to get their riches and their money out of this town. Jacob didn't mention what happened to Dinah, but was worried about the surrounding people banding together to come after them. Later, God will decree that Levi and Simeon were more correct than Jacob. Deuteronomy 20:13. And when the Lord your God delivers into your hands, you shall strike every male in it with the edge of the sword. This is he's telling what they're going to do. You're going to see Joshua and Saul told to do this. This is their rules for military tactics. But the women, the little ones, and the livestock, all that is in the city, and all its spoil, you shall plunder for yourself. And you shall eat the enemy's plunder, which the Lord God gives you. So God is going to give these towns and stuff into their hands. And he says, you kill all the men, and take the women and children, and all their livestock with them. So he is doing exactly what Simeon and Levi just did. Thus you shall do to all the cities which are very far from you, which are not the cities of these nations, but of the cities of these peoples which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance. You shall let nothing that breathes remain alive. So he's talking about the Canaanite people. Well, the land that he is going to give them, nothing is going to be left alive. Not even the animals. But you shall utterly destroy them, the Hivite, and the Amorite, and the Canaanite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite, just as the Lord your God has commanded you, lest they teach you to do according to all their abominations which they have done for their gods, and you sin against the Lord your God. So we're talking about he don't like any of it.
So he wanted to kill them all so they don't become like them.
Right. So Simeon and Levi did the right thing. And Jacob was conniving, trying to figure out, well, everywhere I go, people are going to have a price on my head because they're going to figure they're going to be attacked.
So this tells you what God thinks about these sins.
And later on, I think you're going to find that Jacob kind of moves through the land, and everybody kind of backs up and looks at him. They don't want to mess with him. So Jacob, again, is thinking fleshly thoughts about himself, not caring about his daughter, not caring about what God's plan is. And Levi and Simeon they're mad, probably not even thinking, but in their rage, they did what God is going to tell them to do later. God told them, I have given you this land. Well, my eyes tell me that they're still in the land. I had to go take the land. But he would give it to the Jews. The Jews had to go take the land. This is the type of relationship I like to talk about to people, because everybody thinks that God is going to do everything for them. God does everything as long as you participate.
Right. That's what I said.
When Adam and Eve were in the garden, when Adam was in the garden, God told him to name the animals. God can name animals. Why did he wanted Adam to participate? He gave him a job to do. And he was supposed to tend the garden. The point I'm trying to make is these are real people, and most Christians think of this as a sterile book that is a bunch of kind people, but they had to go to war. We need to read the scriptures carefully and try to discern what God is trying to tell you. That's why I wanted to, if we're just reading along here and not going to Deuteronomy, see, you're not ever going to see what God thinks about this until later, and you won't remember it. So this is, you'll think that Jacob made the right decision and the boys were crazy, and even Jacob cut them out of the will, so to speak. The Old Testament is different than the New Testament, but it's all one book. Jesus is the new covenant. He is the one that is making promises to everyone. And here, the Jews are his people, God's people. The pagans, not so much. But when we come to Jesus, we get to partake in Abraham's covenant, which is the same one they're in. So we get an inherited land, and we get salvation, and we get to be the bride of Christ. All this is about a marriage to God's Son. So whenever you read about marriages in the Bible, you need to think Jesus, because men don't like to think about being the bride. But symbolically, spiritually speaking, the church is going to be God's bride. God would later instruct Joshua and Saul to destroy every living thing in the cities that God would give them. We need to keep in mind what the Nephilim and Rephaim really were and what God thought of them. That's a very important paragraph. He's telling you, I don't want these people. They're demon seed. They're contaminated, and I don't want my people being contaminated. For Jacob to allow these people to intermarry with Hebrews was not permitted. Remember, the Hivites and others were all descendants of Ham, Cush, and Canaan, the cursed one. Back off from Noah's Ark, Ham was the brother that went about, and Cush left, and then Canaan. Well, Ham did the bad thing, but Canaan got the curse. And who are these? Canaanites. Okay? God had separated out the people of Shem and blessed one from the others, and would not have allowed this union with cursed people. Even then, raping a woman was illegal, and compensation was required for the family. Dinah was still being held hostage in the city. Kidnapping is another charge, see? We need to understand the whole situation before judging what happened. If a person wanted to convert to Abraham's covenant, he would have to abandon his idols and follow Abraham's God. These people wouldn't have done that. Today we see people that are Christian, yet they support sodomy and abortion. Have they really submitted to Christ, or are they still following their flesh? We all sin, but we should at least agree with God's will for his people. Satan would have liked nothing better than to mix the seed of Jacob with the cursed seed of Canaan. So that's the bottom line right there. Next week, we'll see Jacob finally go to Bethel, where he met God for the first time and purged the idols from his people. So his people were already picking up idols. Should be chapter 35.